A team is not a team if you don't give a damn about one another.
You going number one or number two?
Trust Dad.
Mom, I gotta go.
What does it take to turn 5 uncontrollable characters into one unbeatable team?
Even with my help, it will be difficult, if not nearly impossible, to defeat a team from Korea.
I'm afraid. You need this fight bad. You need this fight for you, man.
I'm here to teach you how to win. Winning isn't a sometime thing. Winning is an all-time thing.
This is the only thing I know I am good at. Don't take that away from me.
You can work. You can sweat. You can train. You can dream and never be better than good. But when the right people come together at the right moment, when they care almost as much about winning as they do about each other, they can become the best of the best.
I'm gonna take your head off.
Welcome to the second episode of the Last of the Action Heroes podcast, stream channel. I don't know what to call this because it's like the channel within the channel. This is like the flagship. Yeah, it's like the flagship show. This is the show that is going to go over the films that don't cover Bruce Willis, that don't cover Arnold, don't cover Sly, don't cover James Bond, don't cover Dolph, and don't cover Steven Seagal. Is that everybody?
Did you say Schwarzenegger?
I did Arnold. I said Arnold. You know, he goes by either or. I find Arnold a little bit easier to pronounce. So. This is exciting because with us, I've co-hosted with Craig so many times, I don't even want to introduce him. Who cares about him? But we'll get to him. But Kendrick, this is the first time you and I have, met in person, like visually, and this is the first time we've co-hosted together. Kendrick, why don't you say who you are and what show you represent?
Yeah, hi. It's great to see you guys finally outside of your Facebook profile pictures. Yeah, my name's Kendrick. I co-host the Bruce Willis Podcast, Where There's a Willis, There's a Way, with my co-host Josh. I'm really excited to get together and talk with you guys. I've never seen this movie we're about to talk about before, and it is definitely full of recognizable faces, but not recognizable enough that you would start a action hero themed podcast about them. So...
That's a great way of saying this film fits that profile of, I don't think anyone's going to dedicate a podcast to Eric Roberts action films or James Earl Jones actual action films. So this is a perfect kind of film to fall under this umbrella. Yeah.
And by the way, Kendrick, in addition to having a great podcast, some of my favorite podcast cover art.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys are a great show. Where There's a Willis, There's a Way. They're almost too good to be on the network because they're definitely better than me, which is scary. I started this whole franchise, and I got some of these shows that are coming on. I'm like, oh boy! But I've listened to all of your shows. Here's the thing: I listen to everyone's show that comes on the network now because it's just I feel obligated, not in a bad way, but just feel like. If I invited you to come onto the network, I will personally listen to your episode. It's also quality control as well. No,
sure, yeah.
But the Bruce Willis episodes are fantastic. You and Josh are really, truly great hosts, and your coverage of the Bruce Willis films are hilarious. Your rating system is hilarious. Just explain for our audience what your rating system is.
We wanted a way to tell people up front if the movie we were about to talk about was worth watching for people who hadn't seen his movies, especially we just did our 20th episode, so we're still fairly early in his career. There's a lot of movies out there that people haven't seen. A lot of his movies aren't all action movies. So we wanted to kind of let people know up at front time, like pause this, go watch it, or just don't watch it and we'll talk about it. So we decided to rate movies a Bruce Willis out of a Bruce Willis. And every time we do this, it gets more complicated to explain. But basically we give a movie a number of letters. And if we rate a movie at least a Bruce, it's worth watching. So for example, we just did, our 20th episode was Die Hard with a Vengeance, the third Die Hard movie. And I think we both rated that movie a Bruce Willie, which is Willi, which is pretty good. I think it's probably one of our highest rankings. It is an absurd rating system that has grown over time, and it was one of my favorite things.
Are you guys planning to do his Miami Vice episode?
He does a lot of TV. We're not going to probably devote all of his TV to watching. Moonlighting was his biggest break up front, and that's been really hard to find because it's not available digitally anywhere. You can't stream the show Moonlighting. But I was able to have a library copy sent to me, so we were going back through and watching some of those episodes. So I thought we might devote an episode to collectively all of his TV cameos, especially in like the mid to late 90s, does a lot of one episode runs on different TV shows because he's a well-known face at that point.
Was he a Friends?
Yeah, Ross's girlfriend's dad or something. I was not into Friends, but I just remember, I think something along those lines or something like that. But he did a couple episodes on Friends. He was on that 70s show. He was on a handful of other like sitcom era shows in the 90s.
That Miami Vice episode is awesome. It's within the first 2 seasons. It's before Moonlighting, but it's a great episode.
Craig, other than Pulp Fiction, what is your favorite Bruce Willis performance or movie?
Whew, that's a good one. I mean, getting out of the obvious Die Hard lane, I would say probably 12 Monkeys.
Good pick.
And I don't know if either one of you guys have the physical like Blu-ray or DVD of 12 Monkeys. There's a good making of documentary on there where Bruce gets into an argument with Terry Gilliam, the director. I guess there's a scene where like Madeline Stowe punches him and he falls down. And Bruce is arguing with Terry Gilliam. He's like, it could be any woman and she could hit as hard as she can and she's not going to effing knock me down. And it's just funny that they included that in the documentary. But I think that is a great performance. And we've talked a lot about Bruce on the Pulp Fiction show just because he's one of the stars of that movie. But the thing I like about 12 Monkeys is the amount of vulnerability he shows in that movie. Well, I don't know. I mean, Unbreakable's a pretty good performance as well, but I would say...
That's my pick. That's my favorite Bruce Willis show.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think 12 Monkeys, he's got a little bit more range going on.
I enjoyed the story of Unbreakable, I think, a little bit more, but I agree his acting performance is probably better in 12 Monkeys,
Yeah, 12 Monkeys is great. That's actually our very next movie we're about to do.
There you go.
As we're going through this series of movies, I am really finding that I didn't know Bruce Willis that well, and it's been fun seeing him play weird roles that you don't think of him as. But my wife is a much bigger Bruce Willis fan than me. I think she just grew up watching more of his movies because she'll continually be, oh, I've seen this movie before. And I'm like, you have?
Wow.
The one thing about Bruce Willis is, and I don't think he gets credit for it, and for people that listen to Conversations at Jackrabbit Slim's, I'm sure I've said this on the show, I don't think Bruce Willis gets credit for doing what he did in the 90s where he was a huge marquee star. He was commanding record sums of money for films, but then he would go and do something like Breakfast of Champions or 12 Monkeys that obviously weren't huge commercial projects. The studios might have thought they were going to be huge commercial projects, but when you're making a movie with Terry Gilliam, it's not going to be a huge commercial project. And I think Bruce Willis really made it acceptable, if that's the right word, for actors to take pay cuts and do projects that they wanted to do. And I really think that pre-Bruce doing it, a lot of filmmakers weren't doing it, or a lot of actors weren't doing it.
No, I agree.
Yeah, he definitely has a rotation of do a big movie like a Die Hard and then do something small like he did a movie with Paul Newman or other various small roles. Your comment about 12 Monkeys, though, is funny because he was apparently very hard to work with on set. I don't remember what movie it was that he was called behind the scenes Orson Willis because Orson Welles was also notably very hard to deal with on set. And so it's funny how kind of like a diva he was behind the scenes.
Well, I know Kevin Smith has talked a lot about how hard he was to work with on Cop Out.
Yeah.
All right, welcome to Will So There's a Way podcast.
Yeah. But enough about Bruce Willis.
No, well, that's good. No, we'll leave it. We'll leave it at that. Not because I'm not enjoying it, but also because if you want to hear this kind of talk and more regarding Bruce Willis, please check out Kendrick and Josh's show. Where there's a Willis, there's a way. So I do have one question regarding your podcast. When you spin the wheel, explain the wheel, and are you actually spinning something, or is this an arbitrary? Is this behind the curtain you don't want to reveal, or what's the wheel?
So for those of you who are unaware, at the end of all of our podcasts, we do this thing called we spin the wheel of Willis.
Yeah, the wheel of
Willis. When Josh and I created this, again, you never know like what's going to be a fan favorite, and this is often commented to me as people's favorite part of the show. Josh actually has a website set up that has all the entries that people have submitted or we've come up with. And it is a physical spinning of the wheel that we have to come up with answers to on the fly. The one that we've probably done a couple times is what Muppet would play Bruce Willis in this movie instead of Bruce Willis.
This is what I mean, guys. This is what I mean. They're a clever podcast. They got a lot of bits and parts that makes their listening very fun. So even if you don't know the movie they're reviewing, it's still fun to listen. That's what I'm hoping this series will be, because we just did the Force of One with Chuck Norris, and that was Michael from the Steven Seagal podcast. I hope people listen to it even if they hadn't seen the movie, because you don't have to see the movie to listen to it. This might be one, too, where you don't have to see the movie. But just like A Force of One, I'm going to say right at the top here, with Best of the Best, I had a fun time watching this film. As a film, we'll pick it apart a little bit, of course, just like we did with the Chuck Norris film. But it was still a fun watch. I was like, boy, this is a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. And it was actually a lot lighter than I thought it was going to be. I thought the tone was going to be darker. I thought it was going to be something like Kickboxer with Van Damme type tone. I thought it'd be more blood and broken bones and what have you. But it was actually more of a family affair than I anticipated that this movie would be.
Here in the U.S., within the last 2 weeks, came on Netflix.
Oh, it just came on Netflix. It was a recent addition to the Canada Netflix. That's why I was just going through what action films do I have on the Canadian Netflix that, again, I don't have to pay extra for. And this came up. It's like, this is a film that came out in 1989. I was 14 years old when it came out. So this is a film that's been I've seen it on the DVD or VHS shelves growing up and going to Blockbuster. I've always seen it, but I'm like, it's a stupid, what do you call it? Like almost like a straight-to-video type fare movie. Who the hell is Eric Roberts? I don't know who this guy is. And it's got the voice of Darth Vader in it. So all this, it never appealed to me because I was a Van Damme watcher and Stallone and Arnold. And so this seemed like a kind of a second-rate type film. And I guess in many ways it is.
No, you just described it. It absolutely is a second-rate film.
But at the same time, watching it now, I'm more non-judgmental now as I get older than I was as a teenager. I mean, I could watch something today and just kind of just watch it for what it maybe was trying to be, or in the sense of, okay, well, we'll get into it. So first, it's co-written and produced by Philip Ree, and he also co-wrote it. And Philip Ree is he's the Asian star who plays Tommy Lee, not the drummer. I thought that was a kind of a funny name to pick. And it's interesting they picked the name Tommy Lee for this character because Motley Crue was quite big. The Dr. Feelgood was out at this time.
It was like peak Crew.
It was peak Crew, yeah. So it'd almost be like, if you're going to name one of your main characters, like, why don't you just name him, like, I don't know, Ozzy Osbourne while you're at it? So it was it was an odd name choice. But what did you think of Philip Ree? He produced, co-wrote, played the character Tommy Lee in this film. What did you think of him?
I thought he did a good job. So my background on this movie, like I said, I had never seen it before, and I was pleasantly surprised to know that it was on Netflix because I didn't want to have to go digging for it. I didn't know it was a recent addition to Netflix, so that was serendipitous on our part. I thought that the character of Tommy Lee was a lot of fun. When I started watching this movie, I think the obvious go-to comparison is like a Rocky ripoff, because I think a lot of the marketing covers make it look like it's going to be a Rocky-style ripoff. I mean, other than the fact that there's fighting involved, it's a very different movie. So,
well, there was a couple of scenes that were directly ripped off from. And this is just me speaking of as a Rocky nerd and expert. So there's a couple things that stood out right away. It's like, oh boy, they literally stole this storyline from Rocky
and the Karate
2.
Kid as well,
and the Karate Kid and Bloodsport.
I got more Karate Kid than Rocky, but I'm not a Rocky mastermind like you are. So
yeah, well, let's hit those as they happen, Ryan. Watching the film, especially as you get towards the climax of the film, it was Tommy Lee's movie. It doesn't make any sense to have. And forgive me for not remembering Eric Roberts' character's name. Grady, was it?
Alex Grady.
Alex Grady. It's not
from Portland, Oregon, I believe, right?
Yeah,
Isn't he the one who's from Portland?
It's not.
That's right.
It's not his movie. Like at the end of the movie, it's all about Tommy's characters. I guess for financing and marketing, they needed a white guy.
That's a good point, Craig. Well, and I don't think the film suffers because of that. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised, not because Eric Roberts did a poor job. I was both surprised by that, what you just said, and how much I enjoyed Eric Roberts' acting in this. I thought he was silly and fun, but again, it was enjoyable. I don't know how to explain it. I felt like seeing Eric Roberts play, because I've only seen him in a very few roles. I kind of know him as an actor peripherally. And usually everything I've seen him in, he plays like a really creepy, greasy mob boss type guy. And in this film, other than his hair being greasy and long, in this film, he plays a very pleasant, honorable, and a good father. He's a widower, and all these things. I got a real feel for this character. I don't know. I enjoyed his performance in this film.
You know what's funny though? You've seen The Cable Guy, right?
Yes.
And he plays the Menendez brothers.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And he cries the same way in The Cable Guy that he cries in this movie. But in The Cable Guy, it's a comedy, so you're laughing at him. So anytime he cried in this movie, I'm like, wait, those are the Cable Guy tears. So I couldn't help but laugh. And,
the crying was pretty bad. His cry acting was not very good.
The emotional beats didn't quite work for me. And it's funny that you mentioned it's like a Tommy Lee movie, because I was constantly going like, okay, let's learn more about him and his family. And then it was, oh no, we got to go back to Eric Roberts and the kid. And if you miss a practice, you'll never make it back. And all this stuff.
Was that kid really 5 years old?
He must have been at least 8.
He didn't look like a 5-year-old. A funny story real quick. We sat down to watch this last night. I remembered one scene from this movie when we sat down to watch it. And we'll talk about it when we get to it. But my wife had never seen it. And as I'm trying to sell her on watching it, I'm like, yeah, it's an Eric Roberts movie. And she's like, who's Eric Roberts? I'm like, well, it's Julia Roberts' brother. And she's like, wait, she has a brother that acts? And I'm like, yeah, you'll recognize him when he comes on screen. She didn't recognize him, of course, because she doesn't watch Eric Roberts movies. But she noticed the smile. He's got the same smile as Julia. So that was pretty funny.
Yeah, he looked like Pretty Woman in this movie, too. He had the big flowing hair. Like, he had long hair. Which looked pretty okay in a ponytail, but when it was not in a ponytail, it was pretty hard to watch.
Yeah. He had 2 distinct ponytail looks. Now, I can't believe they didn't do an action figure line for this, because they could have sold, 3 Eric Roberts figures. Long, luxurious, flowing hair, Eric Roberts, which always looks weird in action figures because it's just like a helmet. They could have done the casual ponytail where you had the ponytail, but then hair hanging down. So you almost had a ponytail and a mullet. And then full competition ponytail, tied back tight.
You thought way too long about the hair.
Huge missed opportunity. And then you could have gotten 2 Chris Penn action figures with and without cowboy hat. I mean, it's... There are 2 Reservoir Dog connections in this movie. Of course, Ryan, you're nodding, so you caught Chris Penn, of course. Did you catch the other one?
I didn't. Not off the top of my head, no. Of course, Chris Penn. Who's the other one?
At the very beginning of the movie, Grady, he leaves his job at the factory or whatever, and he runs into that older gentleman with the mustache. That's Mr. Brown. That's Eddie Bunker.
Oh, right. Okay.
I remember that conversation, but yeah, that totally flew over.
Yeah, and then he's watching in the bar at the end, I guess, because they live streamed, or it was a live satellite broadcast of this invitational tournament in South Korea. They beamed it to the bar that Eddie Bunker drinks at. Eddie Bunker, though, Tarantino cast him because he was a real-life bank robber. Eddie Bunker had done time for robbery. So when he was casting Reservoir Dogs, he knew that Eddie Bunker was an actor. And then also, who knows, Tarantino might have liked his performance here in Best of the Best. And
sure,
I got to get him for my movie. But either way, there was 2 Reservoir Dogs connections. And then there's also a scene in the Chinese restaurant where Chris Penn picks that really, really racist fight with Tommy, and he's wearing a tracksuit. I swear that's the same tracksuit he wears in Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, maybe took the costume home.
Yeah, right.
I can't wait to talk about the Chris Penn character because we can do probably a whole nother episode on that.
Well, let's actually just bring him up right now. We've gone through the cast. We've talked about Tommy Lee, played by Philip Reese, and I'll actually go back to Philip Rhee, who plays Tommy Lee. He's from South Korea himself. Of course, he's a real-life martial arts expert in his own right. He's one of those, not many stories, but kind of that story of he just made his way into film. The best of it, the best is kind of like his Rocky. It's his personal stories and his personal, he has produced, and I think he ends up directing a couple of the sequels, and he stars in the whole series.
And he's threatened to do a reboot.
That's threatened? Let's do it.
Wow.
And then Chris Penn, rest in peace. He died at the age of 40. In real life, he has a black belt in Taekwondo.
That's surprising because Chris Penn did not impress me in this movie. It didn't seem like the best of the best up there on screen to me.
From fighting or just his character? Or?
Yeah.
Because I had that same thought. I thought he seems a little disingenuous when they're trying out. I believe his whole shtick is to punch them when they're bowing or something along those lines. I don't remember the details. I was never sympathetic towards him, and he just kept being antagonistic. And at the end, I'm like, what was the point of him other than to just add some drama before they get to the tournament?
Drama and humor.
The one scene I remember from the movie is a Chris Penn scene. It's when they go to the tiebreaker and they have to break bricks.
Concrete blocks, yeah.
And Chris Penn says, "What are you counting them for?" That's the only scene I remembered from this whole movie. Yeah. And like I said the line as he said it. Like I was waiting the whole movie for it.
And I laughed out loud.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great scene. There's a couple scenes that there's three, well, that's one of the three that he did that were quite funny. So for our listeners, we should probably just now set up the movie a little bit. We kind of talked about not much regarding the plot. But it's very easy plot, listeners. There is a tournament being held in Korea. I guess there was no North and South at this time. My political, because they just kept referring to as Korea. They didn't say South or North. So I would assume there was a division later after 89. I don't even know.
Did Ahmad Rashad say they were in South Korea? But he's a top-notch broadcaster. Of course, he would get down into those details.
I'm not a geographic or political expert here, but I believe that South Korea often refers to itself as just the Republic of Korea. Calling it South Korea might be more of a Western term. Email in your corrections if you're listening.
Yeah. So for the sake of argument, we're just going to say Korea or the Koreans. Okay. So the movie starts off with a shot in Korea, and you see this group of martial arts class or group, about 100 of them do very cool like movements, and I don't know what the sequence of events they call it when they're all doing synchronized together. I don't know if anyone here is taking karate, but when you what do you call it when you do there's like a movement pattern you have to do to get your certain belts and stuff. So it's like an order of way of doing things. Anyways, they're doing it as a class. We find out though that there's every 3 years, Korea hosts a taekwondo, or essentially it's a mixed martial arts, because they said later in the film that there's taekwondo, kickboxing and karate all allowed, which is basically mixed martial arts. Anyways, they hold that, I guess, in Korea every 3 years. The U.S. was the only country. So this is a really very short tournament. For something that's only every 3 years, they had Korea versus the U.S.
in one day.
Like in 1 hour. It was like...
I mean, yeah, we can assume it's in 1 hour. I guess that part's edited. The actual tournament takes place very little screen time, but I assume.
But how long do you think it really took? Maybe 2 between the opening ceremony and
there were 3 rounds per match. Nobody got knocked out. So how long was a round? 3 minutes?
And it seems like they just jumped on right away. The people that fought, they're done. They don't refight. So they don't have to rest them. They just fight. Next 2 come up. Next 2 come up. Next 2 come up. So really, if they just rotated that way through them very quickly, there's only 5 teams of 1 or 10 people fighting. It doesn't say in the film, but somehow, I guess the U.S., some sort of U.S. consulate figures out who of the 5 taekwondo karate people in America will represent the country. And of the 5 that they chose from in 1989, one of them has a bum shoulder.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's got to be somebody better than the guy with the bum shoulder. And that was played by Eric Roberts' character. He has a bum shoulder. Then Tom Lee was picked. Chris Penn was picked. And 2 other, Virgil, the Buddhist, and Sonny, the Italian.
From Detroit.
Yeah. So these are the 5 best taekwondo. So either 89, maybe that was all they had in 89. Do you guys have any idea?
No. I mean, last episode you talked about Chuck Norris, Van Damme, Seagal.
These are the best of the best, guys. These are the best of the best.
Best of the ones that would work for the money that they offered.
I got the feeling it was kind of setting us up for more of an underdog story, akin to the Rocky theme, I suppose, is obvious underdog kind of used to just come in and easily be knocked over. I think maybe if it had been like the World Cup of mixed martial arts and you saw them suddenly get to the end against all odds, like that may have carried more weight. But even in the actual tournament, they're pretty roundly beaten in most of those competitions up until some of the final ones.
And can we also talk about the coaching element of? Okay.
Well, I'll try to set just the story, and then we can go around with the beats and some of the moments that don't make sense or whatever. Because it's a pretty straightforward story. So that's how they're selected. Then you're right. Then they're trained. We'll get into the trainers. And then there's a little bit of conflict within the group of 5 Americans and Alex Grady's son. And then they go to Korea. Then they have the tournament. It felt very like, I wonder if the sequel ups the ante with more nations, because it felt very weird just to have literally two nations because there was a big ceremony and there's a big crowd, 15,000 people they said were gathered. Capacity crowd to see 5 fights. Now UFC, I know they have about the same, or don't they have like an undercard of about 5 fights and then the actual events like 5 or 7 fights? So this was a very underwhelming event or maybe we didn't see the undercard. Maybe there's other things going on. I don't know. The undercard was, I don't know, Canada versus Papua New Guinea. I don't know. But
no, the drum presentation was the undercard.
Oh, yeah, the drum presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, now, I guess we can go right into the coaching. So the 5 guys are selected. Of course, they're all different walks of life. They all live together. It's a 3-month training program. So during this 3-month training program, I understand they take it from their lives, whatever job or family life they have, it doesn't matter. They come to the central location to focus on their training. And in walks Darth Vader, and he comes in, James Earl Jones, he comes in hot.
Yeah, he's Max James Earl Jones from day one. He's like, I am here to yell and yell a lot.
He's the one that selects the team, and I don't have any experience here, but you'd think that in order to coach a martial arts team, that you would do martial arts. Now
he did. He was retired. He was a martial arts expert. Come on, James.
Put him in a gi at one point. Give us one scene of him at least with a shitty stunt double doing something. There was like no point where I believed, and he was a shitty coach too. All he did was, like Kendrick said, is yell, and then at the final match, he was like, "You can do it. I believe in you.
And
I know you can win."
And he would say, "Focus, stay focused."
I couldn't do that.
He was a horrible coach.
There was nothing in that presentation that made it you think that he was a legitimate coach.
Never.
One of the major themes of this movie was East versus West as far as everything. Like you see the Korean team constantly training in unison and being like very good, and the Western team is fighting with each other. I think it's a very typical Western sports coach to be not very athletic, but just do a lot of yelling and convincing people to do things. You think of your traditional American football coach. He doesn't look like someone who's playing football every day. He looks like, an out of shape guy who just yells a lot and convinces his team to win.
He would have been a football player if it wasn't for his bum knee.
Yeah. And that's a good point, Kendrick, because here we get one of the Rocky influences. I don't know if you picked up on this, Ryan, but I picked up a Rocky IV reversal here where the Koreans were sort of training in the elements.
Yes.
And the American team were training like in the gym, and you kind of flipped it. Whereas in Rocky IV, you had Rocky training in the elements and the Russian training in the high-tech facility. What was the point of karate chopping the tree and then keeping your hand there? Was it developing like hand strength?
You talking about the Koreans?
Yeah. There was that scene where they were like in the snow and they karate chopped the tree and then they would keep their hand against the tree for like 10 seconds.
I think they're taking the chi from the tree. The nature would go into their. There's a lot of spiritualism.
There was a badass shot though where they're like standing in the waterfall.
Yeah.
And I think the guy with the eye patch, who I can't understand how he would be a top-ranked fighter with one eye. You can't see half the shit that's coming your way.
Yeah, who Craig is speaking to there, ladies and gentlemen, is of the 5 Korean fighters, one of them, he's the main, like he is the top fighter of the 5. He's like 35 or 36 years old. He's been doing this tournament stuff for like 20 years, his whole adult life. He's blinded in his left eye. He's blinded. Thus, you would think it's a disadvantage, but Craig, that's just showing you that he is that much more capable and crazy good that he can fight literally with one eye closed.
Just fight him from the left.
He has no depth perception. You could just step back. And
But what I love about it is nobody talks about that advantage. The coach doesn't bring it up. And we are never told in the whole film why he's missing an eye. I think it's the idea is he's been through so many brutal fights that at some point in his fighting career, he's lost the eye.
Oh, man. And then at some point, we find out he killed Tommy Lee's brother 15 years ago.
15, I think, probably 10 to 15 years ago, yeah.
Tommy Lee has to overcome that fear, but those flashbacks were really bad. I don't know if it was just low budget or what,
yes.
But I was just like black and white, and I was just like cringing every time they had to show them again.
You didn't like the analogy of the brother dying as the ice cream cone hit the floor?
Oh, yeah.
It's the same as when Apollo dies and the towel hits the ring.
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same. That's another ripoff.
Well, according to Wikipedia, Kendrick, this movie cost $5 million to make in 1988 or whatever, which seemed about $4 million more than I thought it cost.
I bet you James Earl Jones was a big part of that budget.
And Eric Roberts probably. Eric probably got at least
what had Eric
500,000.
Roberts done prior to this? Like The Pope of Greenwich Village? What was Eric Roberts known for?
I was surprised about actually just how good of shape he's in. He was 33 years old, I think, in this film. I think he was 33, 34 in this film, and he was in very good shape. A lot of shirtless shots with these guys. Speaking of Rocky IV, this movie had crazy montages. It had a lot of workout montages. It filled a lot of time. And people criticized the Rocky IV film for filling up time with the montages. This movie, best of the best. And the montages were very uninspiring. They weren't very pumped. You know how the Rocky or Stallone and or Rocky, however you want to say it, perfected the energy-filled, get you pumped.
The
music's so vital, man.
Talk about the music in this movie a little bit. The fight music is what stuck out to me, was how almost low energy it was. It's supposed to be like ramping you up because, again, you think of Rocky and you think of his training montages and how energetic it is. The music in this movie for the fights felt like I was watching Twin Peaks or something. It was just like very synthy and slow.
You're being too kind, Kendrick. The fights weren't good.
They weren't good, but the music did them dirty.
Everything about those fights, the camera coverage, the editing, the music, the actual fighting, except for that final fight, it all looked terrible. It's almost embarrassing that this was considered a professional, quote-unquote, martial arts film. I can't imagine somebody who did karate going to the theater and seeing this and leaving and saying, man, there were some good moves in that movie.
Chuck Liddell.
Yeah, Chuck Liddell is quoted for saying this is one of his favorite movies. I think my best way to describe this for people listening today would be if you've ever listened to something on YouTube, for example, that had free or extremely low budget music, and you can just immediately recognize where it's like they didn't pay anything for this music in their YouTube video. That's the feeling I got while watching this movie. It's
a great way of saying it. Yeah, your free non-copyrighted issued music on YouTube is the soundtrack of this film. That's perfectly said, yeah. In fact, the stuff that's free now would work better. It would work better. Going back to Chris Penn, this is where they ripped off Bloodsport a little bit. Remember in Bloodsport, they had the character named Jackson, who was always angry and drunk, and
the guy from Ogre from Revenge of the Nerds.
Yes, and so
I actually thought he was in this movie.
Oh,
and then I was like, oh, he was in Bloodsport. But for a minute, I was like, oh, we're going to see Ogre.
So Chris Penn was the Jackson character from Bloodsport. People that remember that film, he's the one that was Jean-Claude's friend. He was like drunk and kind of boorish and oafish, but he had brute strength. He didn't really have any fighting skill per se. So Chris Penn, though he had fighting skill, his character had fighting skill in the film. His bruteness or his crassness was his character, his personality. But he did have a couple of funny lines. Two of them were from the bar. The five of them, before they went out for 3 months to train, they had one night of fun. Whatever the town they were in, they can go out and have a good time. The five guys go to a bar, of course, pick up chicks, and I wonder if there's going to be a bar fight with the locals. I wonder if that's going to happen. Chris Penn, he's just standing by the jukebox or whatever, his character, and this girl's going on her way to the bathroom, and he just asks her, "Are you going number one or number two?" I don't know why. When he asked that question, I literally laughed out loud. I was like, "That's a fantastic thing to say to a girl as she's going to the washroom, as he's just standing there, and she's like, screw you, creep," or something like. But I love it how that's his question and just it rolls right off when she gets angry. I laughed out loud because it makes no sense. There's no follow-up after that. And then he does pick up a girl who's watching some guys play pool. He asks her to dance, and we find out later that starts this bar fight that this girl happens to be with a guy, but the guy was ignoring her because he's playing pool. So she's like, "Oh, it took you long enough to notice I was gone." That was the whole thing, which isn't that bad.
Yeah, she was there with Jason.
The guy gets mad at Chris Penn character, and he goes to punch Chris. But of course, he's karate trained, so he ducks, and he punches his girlfriend instead. And
that's a good shot.
Yeah, and he levels his girlfriend. I'm like, whoa, that was pretty good. I love it. And then Chris says the best line in the movie that I've heard in so long. He goes, "Yeah, man, don't take any lip from her." Girl, that was actually brutal and took me by surprise. It was the 1-2 of her getting clocked, knocked out, punched right in the mouth, and the Chris says, "Yeah, don't take any lip from her." So anyways, those moments there had me sold on the Chris's character for his humor.
I think that bar fight is my favorite fight of the movie. It was fun. It was energetic. James Earl Jones casually protecting his drink as bodies are flying around him.
Yeah.
I think Eric Roberts is on the phone and he's oblivious until suddenly he's like, I gotta go.
He made a collect call, yeah. The jealous boyfriend we alluded to was Jason, Kane Hodder. He's a stunt performer. And I wouldn't be surprised if Kane did the choreography for that whole fight.
Maybe because he's a wrestler / stunt coordinator.
It's obviously a much better display of physical prowess than we saw in the actual tournament. It almost seems like two different crews shot it.
Maybe, yeah.
But that bar fight is
fun.
Hands down probably the best section of the movie.
Yeah, it has the comedy bits. It has them all fighting together. And what I love, too, is that their karate, legit, they all were able to handle themselves and take care of things. There's a bit of comedy, action, brutality all rolled into one. Back to Darth Vader there, when he was coming in hot, when he met the team, he did give them 3 rules. Actually, 4 rules.
Drinking.
No drinking. Do you remember the other
drugs.
ones? No drugs.
No women.
No women. And
no nonsense?
No, one last point. It wasn't it was a rule, but he breaks it. And this is what bothered me, is James Earl Jones' character breaks his own rule. He says, function as a team. He said don't be late. That was number 4. Yeah. Number 5 was function as a team. And so when there was conflict within the team regarding like personal problems, so Eric Roberts' character, he's a widower. His son gets into a bicycle accident, gets hit by a car, gets thrown into a coma, and James is like, no. If you leave, you're off the team. And then Tommy Lee's like, what the F, man? Like, and then he's having his personal issues regarding the fact that he's going to fight the guy that killed his brother in the ring. They're not helping him out with this. He goes, I'm out of here too. And the coach is his approach to old leadership style, and I worked with bosses like this, is just to yell. If somebody's having family problems, I'm just going to yell at you. If somebody's having mental health issues, I'm just going to yell at you. James Earl Jones breaks up the team. So he actually breaks his own rule by causing the team to splinter and not try to form them together as a team.
And they didn't have any alternates.
No, they're going to go, there's 3, a team of 3 for apparently.
I'm glad that Eric Roberts, it wasn't a conflict for him to go to his kid. If he doesn't go to his kid, I'm just going to be like, what is going on? But he very much says, you know what? I'm sorry, this tournament, screw it. I'm going to see my kid who's in the hospital. And I thought that was true to his character, and it worked out really well.
Yeah, I liked it. I actually did like that. His acting was actually... I shouldn't say actually. His acting was good in that scene where he tells James Earl Jones' character, like, are you serious? Like, are you insane? I'm going home. Screw this tournament. It was actually very realistic, and I like that they didn't insult the audience saying, yeah, this guy, he's already lost his wife to whatever. They didn't say how. He wants to be there for his son. So he's like, I'm out of here. They didn't show this because at the beginning of the film, the son says, hey, win that gold medal for me. And the dad's like, yes, I promise. I thought for sure there was going to be some sort of mention of like, in the hospital scene where the son was like, don't forget, Dad, you made that promise. There was no mention of the promise again throughout the whole movie. It would have been a nice callback to the promise or to the gold medal promise, like him giving the gold medal to his son at the end or something. That was kind of a missed opportunity. This is where they ripped off Rocky 2. So his son gets hit by a car. The tournament's 3 days away that they travel. The doctor says he's going to be in a coma either for an hour or a month.
The 2 options for comas.
An hour or a month. So he goes to the hospital thinking at this point, when he actually arrives there, the plane for Korea leaves in 3 days. That's fair. You can't stop the tournament. We get it. And he's in a coma. And I remember in Rocky 2, Adrian was in a coma. And they actually had a mini waiting for the kid to wake up montage. Rocky 2, there was a waiting for Adrian to wake up montage.
Huge effing chunk of Rocky 2.
Right. They Best of the Best did a better job making it quicker. But then the kid moves his hand and touches his dad's hand just the same way that in Rocky 2, Adrian moves her hand and touches Rocky's hand. So I was like, holy smokes, he literally ripped off the coma sequence. What's funny is the editing was horrible. This was really bad editing and storytelling. They really rushed the sequence. So he goes home from wherever he was, or from Portland to wherever they're training. They didn't say where they're training, by plane.
They didn't ever say where the training was, and that, I think, made this hard for me to understand, because if the training was in California, well, that's like a 3-hour plane ride. If it's in Florida and you have to fly from Florida to Oregon back to Florida in 3 days.
It was a 24-hour period. News of the coma. Wakes up from the coma. He's back in the gym because now James Earl Jones says the match is in 2 days. So he did all of this in less than 24 hours, and the coach was still not willing to have him back on the team because he missed 1 day.
With no alternate. So what were they going to do? Were they just going to forfeit that match?
Or somebody had to fight twice?
Wouldn't the Korean team have to agree to that, though?
That's obviously poor writing.
Let me do a little fan fiction here. Too bad Matt's not here, because I know this is Matt loves this shit.
Alternate universe.
Imagine there was an alternate on the team, and he's real cocky. Like, give him some of the Chris Penn cockiness. And Eric Roberts gets back, and then James Earl Jones is like, "Oh, you want back on the team? You got to fight the alternate." And then you get another fight sequence as well.
This brings up two of my story problems that I had. One, which we already kind of touched on. The story is the Tommy Lee story, and this Eric Roberts stuff feels really out of place. And I just wanted to see more of Tommy Lee's struggle with having to fight his brother's killer, and then along with the training, that woman who comes in with the Eastern way of training.
Sally Kirkland.
She is like, James Earl Jones, you're a terrible coach. You need to stop yelling. Why don't you try not yelling? And then there's also the sports science who's crunching the numbers on how to kick. Do they, in any of those training montages, do they ever spar against one another? Or is it just like calisthenics or that?
They did fight each other, remember? Because Chris Penn's character fought Tommy Lee. They got mad at each other.
Tryouts, they fought each other, but I couldn't remember because I was like, this movie has a real lack of fighting. Yeah. There's a lot of training and then the fight at the end and the bar fight. I wanted to see just more of Tommy Lee's struggle. Like, I thought that's the story we should be reading. And then the Chris Penn character, we already talked about his antagonistic stuff, and then it didn't go anywhere. I think, Craig, your story, if Chris had been the alternate and then he comes back and they learn to work together as a team, now there's your story. I'm going to go back into 1980 and redo this story.
Did you guys like that running on the beach montage that just came out of nowhere? It was like a mini Chariots of Fire sequence. It literally was just plopped in the middle of the movie. They weren't doing training montages anymore. They weren't doing drama stuff anymore. But it was like halfway through the movie, let's just do a running on the beach scene. And then it came and went.
So this movie's not long, right? It's
97
minutes.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if they just filmed a lot of B-roll and they're like, oh, shoot, just stick in some running.
Part of the training process was to watch the tapes of the Korean fighters that they were going to fight. And they had them, of course, on the VHS tapes on VCR. And like, if you want to watch these tapes, you got to come into the classroom and I guess draw the tapes from the library. And I love how the stats coach, who seemed to be in charge of all the multimedia computer stats guy or whatever it was, he had access to all these tapes of the fighters, but he actually had access to the death tape of Tommy Lee's brother. They watched it. So the coach and the stats guy watched the death of Tom Lee's brother on the mat. The question was, has anyone seen this? What are we avoiding here? Tom Lee's always been a fighter. Like, he was picked to be best of the best from the American consulate to represent the country. But why is it now that he's all worried about fighting the one guy did he just assume this day would never come, that he might face
it?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't out for vengeance.
And that guy is old, so maybe he just assumed he would never see him again.
Okay.
Or old, he's older than
he actually said he's 36 in the film, that the fighter's 36, to show that I will give them credit that they actually tried to establish a proper timeline between a young Tommy Lee seeing his older brother killed by the same guy who's been fighting still for another 15 years, that he's not going to fight him. And I will say with the eye patch, which we learned later was an accidental killing in the ring, because these sometimes accidents, people are getting punched in the head and necks are breaking or whatever. I don't think well, we know how it ends. Do you believe that the kill was malicious? I know he does illegal hits and he's dirty, but does that make him a murderer?
I don't think it's malicious. Yeah, I think he was out to win, but I think I read somewhere that he's supposed to be struggling somewhat with that's kind of why it ends like the way it is, and that's why he apologizes.
This haunted him too?
Yeah, I feel like there was no...
Because that took me by surprise. Let's just talk about it, because we are talking about. So at the end of the film, spoiler.
They do the Rocky ending.
Yeah, they do the Rocky ending where. Let's go back a bit. So Tommy Lee, we discover some of the training sequences. We discover that Tommy Lee has a killing kick. That if his rage is unleashed, he will murder you. That he has to hone his own power. He has a power which kills, because they're holding that, what do you call that, kicking mat, the big square, cushion.
But this one was like wired to like a pitcher's gun.
Drago punch.
The Dolph Lundgren, yeah.
So it can measure the kicks. So one of the fighters, who's a trained fighter, is holding this bag, which he's probably held himself as a fighter a million times, the Buddhist fighter. And Tommy Lee is angry now because the coach is egging him on. Just kick it, let it all out. So he kicks it, he breaks the cushion like in half and basically almost kills Virgil on the gym floor. This is to let us believe, this is how powerful his kicks are, is that he can kill somebody through this kind of protective mat. That when it comes to the final fight, he's got his brother's killer at his mercy, and he doesn't finish the finishing blow. He shows mercy, and that mercy alone allows the Korean team to win the gold medal because they don't win on points.
To lead up to the final fight, they're down, 6 points?
6 points or a knockout, and they can win.
Yeah. We have the lead up to that. So all he had to do was knock down his opponent to get the win. Why not just kick his leg out from under him?
Yeah. Sweep.
Grady's freaking out. He's, coach, he's going to kill him. He's going to kill him. And James Earl Jones is doing his Darth Vader no voice. I don't know if again, it's like Kendrick sort of alluded to it. The editing is just so bad.
The editing's bad.
Why didn't he just give him a nice tap, karate chop him in the chest? Or it's not an all or nothing thing here. He didn't have to do the death kick. Just kick his leg out from under him and you get the win. It seems like it was just, they were like, oh, we don't want the American team to win, so his only option is to kill the guy.
Yeah, maybe it's like a video game where you've used all your punches and you only have the death punch left, and you're like, well, it's either this or nothing. But basically, the Korean team wins, they get their medals, and then they're like, well, actually, you deserve them, and they all give their medals over. The problem is, it wasn't close. It was America lost almost all those matches, and then they almost got close at the end, and then they still lost.
I think because I think at that point they recognized that Tommy Lee could have done the knockout kick to this guy, but he was so beaten up. To his credit, the quote-unquote bad guy, or the strongest Korean, the one that killed Tommy's brother, he was beaten to a pulp. He still got up on his feet, and he was
with his eye patch missing.
With his eye patch missing.
The milky eye.
We got to see the milky eye. Look, I know it's silly, I know it's cheesy, but there's some credit I will give, because I was actually surprised they actually humanized a little bit, because I thought for sure that it was a malicious kill until the very end. It wasn't,
because he does 3 cheap shots in this match.
Yeah,
he kicks him in the groin. Then he does the one illegal move that the ref doesn't catch. They set him up as a dirty fighter.
Right, and I agree. Yeah. And I agree that he's a dirty fighter, but I don't think he's a killer. I think his carelessness maybe caused it, and that's the guilt he's living with. But he stands up to face Tommy Lee, but he has nothing in him. And Tommy Lee recognized, granted, he's on his feet ready to fight me, but he recognized that he doesn't even have the strength. He's so bloody, pulped, and broken, he can't even throw a punch, that he lets him just not punch him. So anyways, what I'm trying to get at, so at the end when the Koreans got the medals, they won, I was legitimately surprised when the guy came forward. I was like, what happened is Tommy Lee's opponent, the killer of his brother, actually walks forward and hands over his gold medal and says, I forget the exact quote.
He basically says, you alluded to it at the beginning of the episode, where he said basically, I didn't intend to kill your brother.
Yeah.
It's been with me ever since. You've shown honor and
mercy and something like that, and that's the real victor.
And that makes you I think he says brother, but he says that makes you an honorable man or whatever.
And then he says, I will stand in for your brother. I'll stand in as your brother.
Okay, yeah. And they it was a well-acted scene. It's probably the best acted scene in the movie. I mean, anytime you see two men talk to each other like that, especially in 1989, and there's tears, I think it was a powerful moment. I wasn't going for a tissue. It was the only real emotional scene in the movie for me. Couldn't get into any of the Eric Roberts crying stuff.
Well, Eric Roberts was crying full throttle in this scene. He was just bawling. He just loved this moment.
Can we also go back to Eric Roberts getting his shoulder injured? He's going to win the match. Eric Roberts is going to win the match. He gets the devastating kick to the shoulder that dislocates it. He's got a 2-minute injury break. They have to decide if he's going to come back or not. And he convinces Tommy Lee to pop it back in place.
To keep him from getting knocked out of the match, right?
Yeah,
disqualified.
And then all he has to do is hold on for 30 seconds. It seemed pointless, first of all. There was no reason for it. There was no drama. He held on for the 30 seconds. Was it just a callback to the fact that he had a bad shoulder?
I think so. I think it's just to show just his true power and his strength. He's able to get his shoulder popped in, which shoulder popping in movies is, I really don't like watching this stuff. I know
we see it in every Lethal Weapon movie as well, right?
I can't handle that. But I love how they literally tie his arm to his side. And he goes, this makeshift.
So why pop it at that point? Why not just let the gimpy arm hang down? And he won the match anyway. All he had to do was avoid the guy for 30 seconds. I enjoyed this movie. I don't want anybody listening.
It's easy. No, I got you.
Yeah.
It's easy to.
But at the same
there's
time,
a lot of faults with this movie.
As much as I enjoyed it, it's extremely easy to pick it apart because it's got a lot of careless filmmaking.
I always loved the pre-9/11 airport stuff. They're all waiting in the lobby. They can just run right up to the lobby, the ticket counter, no security checks. Oh, yeah, I'm just going to show up for the plane today. Oh, here's your ticket. No check-in before. I love pre-9/11 airport.
Yeah, there's a lot of great 80s moments in this.
You talked about how they had tapes, and they talk about Sonny from Detroit. The guy he's fighting has some kind of interesting fighting style or something. So that's why we're going to teach you to be like tight and compact or whatever. And then you never see that in the match. It looks just the same as they're doing the same kicks and the same punches. And that's the stuff that you set shit up and then you don't deliver on it. It almost seems they were playing like tag team with the movie. They're like, okay, you're going to do the training sequences, tag, you're it. You do the tournament without watching the previous scenes.
I don't know if they ran out of money or what. The movie definitely was on the shorter side of things. So they could have easily spent another 30 minutes setting that up or drawing out the fight, making the fight multi-day. Who knows? But Koreans, all we really get to know of them is they have fighting montages, and I would have liked to have a little more what's going on with them. It would have been the fight, I think, was each guy had its own round, right? So it was like 5 rounds or whatever.
3 rounds, 2 minutes each.
If each of the 5 had their own unique thing, and then you get to watch them each fight with that unique thing, and some work and some don't work, I think that would have been an interesting payoff to all that setup that we had.
Yeah, it's a good,
like Kendrick, you basically said there's no dramatic urgency. Everybody loses. It's not competitive at any point. It's just, okay, wow, the Americans didn't send the best of the best. They sent like what they could. I mean, they get dismantled, and it
sounded like the American team as well, the coaching team, they picked who's going to fight who, so I guess Korea doesn't have a say in that matter? Because they were like, you're going to fight this guy. The way they said it sounded like they had chosen according to each person's fighting capabilities. Like, they specifically made sure Tommy fought the best guy.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like a
home field advantage, since Korea had the home field.
Maybe.
Yeah, that
you let
like
the opposing team select
like boxing or something where, he had the title for that round or whatever, and so they knew going in that Korea won the previous tournament, or I don't know.
Yeah, so Korea was like, you know what? Just send your 5 best and we'll fight whoever you send.
Yeah.
There you go.
Exactly.
I guess there was a weight class, too. There must have been.
Well, that's how it was determined. Because they say that the final fight is the 175-pound weight class or whatever. So, yeah, I think you're right, Ryan. I think it was based on weight, although Chris Penn was obviously heavier than Tommy Lee.
Yeah. We should mention, too, that the tournament was 3 rounds, 2 minutes each, by points. But if the points are tied,
you go to blocks.
Blocks. When the blocks test your strength and focus, whoever breaks the most blocks wins. What happens if they break the same amount of blocks? They get set up more?
Again, that was another sequence that didn't serve any purpose.
What are you counting them for?
That's the best line in the movie, man. What are you counting them for?
It seems like they only did that because they set it up with Sally Kirkland.
Yeah.
They showed her breaking the bricks. So then they're like, oh, we'll break bricks in the movie. And then he loses anyway.
I think we've glossed over Sally Kirkland's character. So we should make mention that, we have a female coming in to train these men. And, of course, this is a standard, 80s. Like, a female can't teach a man. She comes in with her own credentials. She's Eastern philosophy expert / Taekwondo. She spent time in the Far East. I love her background. I want to see the movie where she got her credentials. I want to see that movie where she gets all these credentials. She's 48 in the film, and she looked 48. I don't mean that with any disrespect, but she just looked older. I think they're trying to make her look younger. But I will give the credit to the filmmakers or the writers that they didn't do any love interest with her. I was actually surprised by that. She came in as a coach, as part of the staff. She was a female. They addressed that. And she did help with their basically her approach was the coach will help with the physical aspects of the fighting, and she'll come in with the mental focus. I know, just because she's a perfect. That's why she came in, Craig. You don't have to like it, but that's why she came in. She came in to help them focus mentally, to have the same kind of mental focus that the Koreans have, apparently.
But that's what James Earl Jones did when he gave him the pep talk, the inspirational quote.
It wasn't working.
I don't know exactly. It's not super clear on who James Earl Jones's boss is. There's some kind of governing agency that's.
I knew that dude too. He was an actor I've seen before.
Telling people, like you have to do this, and you're off the book here.
It's just the money, the guy providing the money. He must be whoever, it's like the producer of a movie. He doesn't direct or write the movie, but at the end of the day, they finance it, they can kick you out. So he's probably just a financer.
Yeah, so there's like a little back and forth between James Earl Jones. The two coaches are kind of like at odds a little bit. It was nice that they basically were like briefly, she's your coach, treat her with respect, and there's a little bit of grumbling. And then people are just kind of like gloss over and move on. Yeah,
I actually give it credit for that they didn't do a trite. They did in Top Gun. That's exactly what they did wrong in Top Gun. The Kelly McGinnis character was a female officer pilot teaching these rookies. Of course, one of them has to sleep with her. Where here, they actually, no, she's a female, and she has something to offer, and we moved past it, and they were good about it. And yeah, I'll give them credit for that. After seeing this, guys, we don't rate Bruce Willis here with... This is my first time seeing it. This was your first time seeing it too, Kendrick, and your first time in a while, Craig. I know we're going to be doing the sequel. Sean Malloy of I Must Break This podcast, apparently he wants to do the sequel. So maybe the sequel fixes a lot of the complaints we had, because he seems to be excited about the sequel. So would you guys, though, recommend, or on your own time, would you see the sequel? Or are you done with the series?
I'd probably pass.
Really?
Yeah. Is Sally Kirkland in the sequels? Do you know?
That's a good question. I know Eric, and so Tommy Lee and Eric's character are in the part 2.
Correct. Yeah.
And then Tommy Lee's character, I think, is then in parts 3 and 4.
And he directs and produces them also.
I think so. Yeah. Like he
didn't direct the sequel though. He just produced it.
Right.
Oh, okay.
I do not see Sally Kirkland. Meg Foster seems to be doing the.
Christopher Penn's back. So Penn's back for the sequel. I've definitely seen the sequel. Are you kidding me?
Wayne Newton's in it. Hold on. Wayne Newton and Sonny Landham.
Oh.
I don't know. You going to change your vote, Kendrick?
Yeah. I mean, it's 101 minutes, so it's a little longer. Maybe they can fill in some more details.
Oh, David Brands, who plays Angel in the Buffy series.
That had to be like one of his first movies. I wonder if he played like a young...
He plays a parking valet.
Oh, okay. If this is easily found online for me to watch it, if it's on either Netflix or Prime or whatever, and if I'm going to be involved in the podcast episode. If not, it's probably pretty low on my list of seek it out.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes for scheduling. I know Sean's on it for sure. He wants to be on that one. So I will say we don't really do this on our... Well, we do. We just don't do fast. We don't have a spin the wheels or rating system on our show. But I will say, like I did for the Force of One, it has all the flaws that you can think of in a film. Absolutely. Plot holes, bad editing, horrible soundtrack, terrible acting. Boy, I had fun watching it. And it wasn't even a bad movie, like The Room bad in that sense. I don't know how to explain it. A Force of One, again, the Chuck Norris film, is the same vein of film where it's horrible in every way that you can think of. The acting, the editing, the beats don't work. But I was never bored, and I kind of laughed, and I had a good time, and I don't know what else to say. So if you want to watch a film on Netflix for free, you got 80 minutes to kill, you're stuck in your house. Honestly, guys, it's those who are listening, you're not going to be bored. You might even have a bit of fun.
I think its length is its credit in that you don't get bored because it's over in an hour and a half.
So for better or for worse, we don't get all those developments or plot holes aren't filled in. All the things that we were talking about that are missing.
Yeah.
Kind of give a credit to the film that you get through it quickly. All right. Well, let's close up. Craig, why don't you say to everyone where you're from, where they can find you?
I am Craig. I'm part of the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network. About every 6 months, 6 to 8 months, maybe once a year, you get a brand new Slycast episode, which is a chronological exploration of Sylvester Stallone's cinematic career. Although we are releasing our classic episodes as part of this feed, so I think I've been doing the last Sunday of every month. We've been putting a classic episode up. If you haven't listened to the Slycast, just scroll further back in this timeline here, and you'll find I think our first 4 episodes have been posted. And aside from that, off network, I'm doing my own little side project where once a month, the first Friday of every month, I chat the movie Pulp Fiction with a different... It's been mainly podcasters, although I did have a screenwriter on at one point. And it's just a real loose, fun discussion about Pulp Fiction. And again, that's the first Friday every month. And that's called Conversations at Jack Rabbit Slims. That's what I got going on.
And Kendrick.
You can find the Bruce Willis podcast that we have talked about already on here on the Action Hero Podcast Network feed. It's Where There's a Willis, There's a Way. And our next movie is 12 Monkeys coming out here in a few weeks. Or you can find me on Twitter tweeting about goofy things at Kmartinix. That's Kmartinix.
Awesome. And if you're coming onto this show because you're a huge fan of Eric Roberts or James Earl Jones or Best of the Best film, and just happen to see this film review, we welcome you to the show and to the network. Check out all the other shows that we have on this network. We got Dolph Lundgren, Bruce Willis, James Bond, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Steven Seagal, and Sylvester Stallone. I think I got everybody. Check out my shows if you're new. If you came over because you're a fan of the Bruce Willis podcast, because you came over here because you're a Kendrick fan, which is totally understandable. Check out the reviews that Craig and I have done as well, and Stallone standalone films. Or check out my great coverage on the Rocky films. It's all in the feed. Just take a look, and something will tickle your fancy, I'm sure. If you like Bruce Willis and you came over because of that, you gotta like some of the other movies we reviewed. The math has to work. There has to be that overlap. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for Kendrick. It was awesome doing this with you. Craig, as always, it's a blast. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, guys.